Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. Before we commence, I shall now request Narayananji at the shrine to initiate with puja. Narayananji.
ओम अच्युताय नमः, ओम आनंदाय नमः, ओम गोविंदाय नमः। शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। अयमूर्त समुत्सर्गोऽन्दो मन्दोनो क्रन्दो अयमूर्त समुत्सर्गोऽस्तु तदेव लग्नं सदिनं तदेव ताराबलं चन्द्रबलं तदेव विद्याबलं दैवबलं तदेव लक्ष्मीपते तेन्द्रियं स्मरामि। ओम भूर्भुवः ओम सुवः ओम महः ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओम अवज्योतिर्सम्भ्रममुर्मुस्वरम् ममोपात समस्त दुर्द चैत्वर हि परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थं करिष्यमाणस्य कर्मणः निर्विघ्नेन प्रसन्नं माधव विघ्नेश्वरपूजां करिष्ये। पृथ्व्या मेरुपुरुषे सूर्यं चन्द्रगोर्मो देवता पृथ्वी दिया तुला लोकाधीतं विष्णुना तुला संसतारे मां देवी पवित्रं गुरुशासनम् आगमार्थं तु देवानां कमनार्थं तु रक्षकं खण्डारवं करां यादव देवदवानलाञ्छनम् मोपात समस्त दुर्ग चैत्वर हि परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थं निर्विघ्नं माधव विघ्नेश्वर पूजां करिष्ये। गणानां गणपतिं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पत आरुष्मन्नपुष्टिसारम् अस्मिन् दर्शनाबिम्बे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिं आवाहयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः औपचारिकत्राणं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरम् समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदातम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धां धारयामि समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धोपरियक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः रङ्गनाथम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः हरिद्राकुङ्कुमं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पैः पूजयामि। ओम सुमुखाय नमः ओम एकदन्ताय नमः ओम कपिलाय नमः ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः ओम लंबोदराय नमः ओम जिगणाय नमः ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः ओम विनायकाय नमः ओम धूमकेतवे नमः ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः ओम बालचंद्राय नमः ओम गजाननाय नमः ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः ओम हेरंगाय नमः ओम स्कंदपूर्धवाय नमः ओम सिद्धविनायकरे नमः ओम शंकर मोक्ष विनायकरे नमः। ओम आतुपुर विनायकरे नमः। ओम महागणपतिये नमः। नानाविध परिमळ पत्र पुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। दीपार्थं समर्पयामि। अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवसवितुर्वरेण्यं सत्यं दौर्जन्य प्रसन्नामि। अमृत स्वाहा। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा। ओम अपाने स्वाहा। ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा। ओम उदानाय स्वाहा। ओम समानाय स्वाहा। ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। नाट्यचक्रे नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतं सुस्रावसं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। नमो नमो गणेशाय नमस्ते विश्वरूपणे निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे कार्यं नमामितं गजानन अभिरामधर्मार्थं गजाननमहर्निशम् अनेकदन्तं भक्तानाम् एकदन्तम् उपास्महे। महागणपतये नमः। महागणपतये नमः। महागणपतये नमः। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरम् आत्मन्यं समर्पयामि। महागणपतये नमः। महागणपतये नमः। महागणपतये नमः। वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं शिरसा कृणामि। ओम 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 सुव ओम मह ओम जन ओम तप ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओमाव ज्योतिर्समृद्धं अमोपात समस्त दुर्द चैत्वर श्री परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम शुभे शोभने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय प्रार्थे श्रीवेदे वराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वंतरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे भागे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरु दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यापारिके प्रवादिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये सोमकृतनाम संवत्सरे उत्तरायणे करिष्णतु मिथुनमासे कृष्णपक्षे सप्तमी तिथियां शुभदितो भानुवासरयुक्तायां उत्तरप्रोष्ठापदा नक्षत्रयुक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ कर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायाम् अस्यां सप्तमी तिथियां शुभदितो मम जन्मापापस् जन्मप्रति एतत्पर्यन्तं मध्ये संभाविधानं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्य अवनोनाथम् अस्माहं सहकुर्माणं क्षेमसद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्तमङ्गलाभ्यर्थं समस्तदुर्दोषाभ्यर्थं रमणमहर्षेः प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्यसिद्ध्यर्थं श्रीरमणमहर्षेः पूजां करिष्ये। तदङ्गं कलशपूजां च करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। सोमनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च करसस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्र समाधिर्थ मूले तत्र सिद्धो ब्रह्मा मातृगुणे समृद्धा उषतु सागरा सर्वे सप्तद्विधा सुंदरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेद अथर्वण गंगे चैतन्य गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु अंगैः देता सर्वे कलसाम्ब समाधिता आयन्त देव पूजातं दुर्दश कारगा तंबुरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णु विष्णुकरे देवे पूजिते कर्मी राजने नमोक्ते देवो देवादि प्रोक्त जीव देव स्नान अंजार निर्मलयं सोयाम ने पूजे ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्तियुक्ता योग पीड़ात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिगुरुमाय नमः अनंताय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दशदिग्पालेभ्यो नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परम ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य जी प्राणविष्टामंगस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिर चिकित्सा धर्माणि संतांसि सकल जगत स्थिति सम्मार्गाणि प्राण शक्ति परा देवता आम बीजम हरिम शक्ति रोम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिम दर्जिनीभ्यां नमः रोम करतलपुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम तिर्याय नमः हरिम सरसे स्वाहा रोम शिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिम नेत्रदाय वसट रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध ज्ञानम रक्तांबोधिस्त बोधोलस तरुण कराब्चे पासं बोधंड मिक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचवाणा विप्राण सुख कबालं त्रिनंदिता पिनव सोरट्या देवी बाला डोना बहुदूरी प्राण शक्ति पराना ओम आम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिमाम अम्यं रमणं वंशं सम्ह अंश सोहम सोहम अंश अस्यामूर्तौ जीवदृष्टदो अस्यामूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्वस्वस्वस्वत्र दिव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिभूत आयुस्तानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुगम सुरम दृष्टंदु स्वाहा ओम अस्य श्री प्राणविष्टामंगस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिनिगिति सामधर्माणि संतांसि सकल जगत स्थितिसलि सम्मार्गाणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति रोम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं दर्जनीभ्यां नमः रोम करतलपुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम इर्याय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा रोम शिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वसट रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध असुनीदे पुनरस्मात् सक्त पुनः प्राणहीनो देवोगम योपस्य में सूर्य मध्य मनुदेव मृणानस्वत्ति आवायुदो भव श्रद्धाविदो भव सन्निधो भव सन्निधो भव अवगुंडितो भव सुब्रतो भव सुब्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामिन् सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् शुभं प्रतिपादेन तिन्देस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु ओम भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवदत्तप्रसवसत्यन्दर्जन प्रसन्नामि अमृतस्वामिनं स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपानाय स्वाहा ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा ओम उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नटराजने नमः शिव पार्वतीये नमः ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय नमः प्रगंड नाट्यचक्रे नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपचार सूत्रापोषं समर्पयामि धीराजनं समर्पयामि धीराजनन्तरं आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि I will recite Bhagwan Stotram. He Gurubhyo Namaha, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Abharadhati Sugvari, Rasho Yeshoni Matram Bhuvanam Samastam, Gunayidam Tam Brahmanam Gaviram, Jindavirinam Riti Sindhayami, ओम महासेन महोंसेन जाताय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम गुरवे नमः। ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः। ओम मौजसे नमः। ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः। ओम जगद्विदावताराय नमः। ओम श्री भूमिनादास्तनोतिदाय नमः। ओम पराकर कुलोतंसाय नमः। ओम सुंदरातदवत्पलाय नमः। ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः। ओम सयायंबा सयायवते नमः। ओम शोणातुल महोलीन मानसाय नमः। ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः। ओम श्रीमद्वादशान्न महास्तरे दत्त विद्योदयाय नमः। ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ओम परमार्थविदे नमः। ओम दिव्यराय नमः। ओम पितृपदार्पेशिने नमः। ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृपदे नमः। ओम पितरादेस्त सोणशैलम प्राप्ताय नमः। ओम तपोमयाय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम महायोगिने नमः। ओम महोत्साहाय नमः। ओम कुशाग्रतीये नमः। ओम शांतसंकल्प संभ्रमाय नमः। ओम सुसुदृशे नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय नमः। ओम तपस्वीर सर्वंगाय नमः। ओम उल्लांबोज विलोचनाय नमः। ओम चंद्रिका सुतासुती मंडिदानन मंडलाय नमः। ओम सूदवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः। ओम सूर्यदाक्र विप्रमाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांत तत्वज्ञाय नमः। ओम चिन्मुत्रे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणाधिगाय नमः। ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः। ओम विराजित स्वराकृतिये नमः। ओम उत्तितनयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम रसिदासन तांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाधिनिवाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाधिमुखाय नमः। ओम स्वराजे नमः। ओम महर्षिये नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईत्याय नमः। ओम भूम विद्या विशारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ओम आप्ताय नमः। ओम रुजमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः। ओम समद्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्यद्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः। ओम दयार्णवाय नमः। ओम श्री सोणासुर युरुद्भूत स्कंदाश्रम निकेतनाय नमः। ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेश्वरे नमः। ओम सद्भक्त वृंद परिकृताय नमः। ओम गणेश मुनिपिंगेन सेविता कृष्णोरुवाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ संसिन्न संशयाय नमः। ओम वर्णातरो मदादीदाय नमः। ओम रसज्ञाय नमः। ओम सौम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मवदे नमः। ओम सर्वावधि मदस्थानाम आराध्याय नमः। ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ओम आत्मारामाय नमः। ओम महाभागाय नमः। ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः। ओम विनदाय नमः। ओम विनुदाय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम भावगोज्वलाय नमः। ओम दर्शनाथक सम्मारणे नमः। ओम मौनेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः। ओम मिर्चादिकरसानित्याय नमः। ओम स्मरणात्मकमोचकाय नमः। ओम अंतस्मिन चंडांसवे नमः। ओम संसारतारकाय नमः। ओम सोनादृष्टिदिष्टरे नमः। ओम अर्थविद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः। ओम अविच्युत निज प्रज्ञाय नमः। ओम नैसर्गिक महातमसे नमः। ओम कमंडलुधराय नमः। ओम सुब्रगवीरवसराय नमः। ओम गुहाय नमः। ओम दंडवाणीये नमः। ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ओम पवरोगपिशक्वराय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। ओम देवदमाय नमः। ओम अमर्त्याय नमः। ओम सेनानिये नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। I will recite Upadesha Saranga. All of you can join me. Satturajaya Rapade Phalam Karma Gimmaram Karma Dajjanam Priti Mahadada Padana Karanam Palamasaswadam Gadanirodagam Iswararpidam Nechayakudam Chiddasodagam Muktisadagam कायवाग्मन कार्यमुत्तमं भोजनं जप चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगतैषधी युगसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनम् उद्धमस्तवा उज्जमन्दद सिद्धजं जप ध्यानमुत्तमम् आज्यधारया श्रोदशासमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलदमरं वेदभावना सोवमित्यसा भावनामिदा भावनीमदा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुद्धमा तिरुष्टरे मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्ति योगमो दार्शनिश्चितम वायुरोदना लीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोध साधनम सिद्धवायव सिद्क्रियायुधा सागयोन्मयी शक्तिमूलका लय विनाशने उभयरोधने लय कदम पुनर् भवति नो मृदं प्राणवन्दना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नासमेत्यद नष्टमानसो दृष्टयोगिन नित्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिदं सिद्धमात्मन सिद्मदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं दुहिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्गवात् वृद्धयस्महं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मनः अमयं कुतो भवति किं वद ऐपदत्यहं निजविसारणम् अमीनासभा अमहं दया सुरवीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिज्ञमन्वगम् अहमिलीनके यपल्लसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीदम नामसे कद गज्जडं सस सत्ववासिगा चित्ववेदरा सद्दयायिकी सिद्धयायहम् ईशजीवयो वेशदीविदा सस्वभावतो वस्तु केवलं देशानद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भयात् आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्धिता अज्ञानहीनति ज्ञानमस्तिगं नादुमन्तरम् किं वसूमि चात्मदर्शने अव्ययभवा पूर्णसित्सुगं बन्धमुक्त्यति तं वरं सुगम बिंददीयजी वस्तुदैविक अहमवेदकं निज विभानकं महतितं तवो रमणवागियं महतितं तवो रमणवागियं महतितं तवो रमणवागियम्। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः।
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra's Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. Mr. James has been with us for nearly 3 years, guiding us every second Sunday of the month and enlightening the way of the path that Bhagwan Raman Maharishi showed us. As he has been doing for the last 6 months, he shall be furthering the discourse on Anima Vidai. I would now request Mr. Michael James to take over and help us further. Sir, over to you.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Last time I was discussing verse 2 of Anima Vidai. I hadn't completed my discussion, so I will continue from where I left off last time. Oh, before I continue, can I just say one thing? If anyone watching this on YouTube, if you have any questions you would like to ask, please feel free to write your questions in the chat box, and they will then be relayed to me. And towards the end of a meeting, I can answer any questions that any of you may like to ask. So as I was saying, I was partway through explaining the second verse of Anima Vidai. But what Bhagavan says in this verse is, since the thought this, the body composed of flesh, itself is I, alone is the one thread on which the various thoughts are strung. If one goes within, investigating thus, what is the place from which I spread out? Thought ceasing in the cave, meaning in the cave of the heart, Atmajnana, pure self-awareness, alone will shine spontaneously as I am I. This alone is Mona, the one space, the abode of bliss. And then comes the Pallavi, the refrain for this song, that comes at the end of every verse. Aye ati sulapum, Anima Vidai, aye ati sulapum. That means extremely easy. Atma Vidya, extremely easy. So what I explained last time is firstly that ego, the thought that is aware of itself as I am this body, is the one thread on which all other thoughts are strung. Therefore, if we go within investigating the source from which we've spread out, ego and all other thoughts will cease. That is, the nature of ego is to subside to the extent to which we investigate. So if we turn our attention within to see from where this ego rises, from where it spreads out as all this multiplicity, ego will thereby subside and everything else will subside along with it, will cease along with it. And then I discussed what Bhagavan explains in this regard in Ulladu Narpadu verse 25. That is, the nature of our self as ego is to rise, stand, and flourish to the extent to which we attend to anything other than ourself, but to subside and dissolve back within to the extent to which we attend to ourselves alone. That's a paraphrase of that, the gist of what Bhagavan is teaching us in verse 25 of Ulladu. So, since such is the nature of ego, the only way we can free ourselves from ego is by attending to ourselves. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as ego subside. And when we subside, the underlying reality alone remains shining. That is our own being, our own existence, what we actually are. So when ego and all other thoughts cease as a result of our going within, investigating the source from which we have spread out, Atmajnana means pure self-awareness, will shine spontaneously as I am I. That is, till now we've been aware of ourselves as I am this or I am that, I am this body. But when we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know ourselves as I am I. I am nothing other than I. I'm nothing other than myself. That is what we always actually are, but we will recognize that only to the extent to which we turn our attention within. And then I went on to explain that our real identity is not either I am this or I am that, but only I am I. So those statements such as I am Brahman are useful as preliminary teachings. The ultimate teaching about our real identity is just I am I. Why teachings such as Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, why these are important at first is that we start on this spiritual path looking for something outside ourselves, looking for God or Brahman or knowledge or happiness or whatever. We're looking for it outside ourselves. So the Upanishads tell us, Tattvamasi, you yourself are that. In other words, there's no Brahman or God other than yourself. So if we want to know God or to know Brahman, all we need to do is to know ourselves as we actually are. So the aim of the Mahavakyas, such as Tattvamasi and Aham Brahmasmi, the aim of these Mahavakyas is to turn our attention back towards ourselves. So they're very necessary as preliminary teachings. But the ultimate teaching about our real identity is that not that we are God or we are Brahman, but just I am I. That is when, since God or Brahman is that which is shining within us as I am I, when we know ourselves as we actually are, we won't know ourselves as I am God or I am Brahman or I am Shiva, Shivaham. We will know ourselves just as Aham. I am I. I'm nothing other than I. Not only is I am I the ultimate teaching about our real identity, but it is almost also the most practical teaching, because to keep our attention fixed firmly on ourselves, which is the aim of all these Mahavakyas, to turn our attention back towards ourselves and then to keep it fixed there, in order to do so, in order to keep our attention firmly fixed on ourselves alone, we should not think that we are anything other than I. That is, if we are thinking I am Brahman, our attention is getting switched between I and some idea that we have about Brahman. Until we know what we actually are, we cannot know what Brahman actually is. So for us, Brahman is just an idea. So if we're thinking I am Brahman, we're identifying ourselves with some idea. That is not the way to know ourselves as we actually are. To know ourselves as we actually are, we need to look deep within to see what we actually are. When we see what we actually are, we will see I am I. And that which is aware of itself as I am I, that is Brahman, that is God. So God or Brahman is what shines eternally in our heart as I am I. So when we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, we will not be aware of ourselves as I am Brahman or I am God, but only as I am I. When we investigate I am, the source from which we've risen as ego, ego will die, and what will then shine forth as I am I is our real nature, which is the one substance, Poro, the infinite whole, Purna. And then I went on to explain that the clear recognition, I am I, is both the path and the goal. Because the deeper we go in the practice of self-investigation, the more clearly we recognize that we are nothing other than I. And when this recognition becomes perfectly clear, that awareness of ourself, that is awareness of ourself as we actually are. So it was up to this point that I had explained last time. So I will continue from here now. The fact that when Bhagavan talks about I am I, he's not only referring to our real nature, the ultimate goal, but also the means to attain that is made clear in a number of places. One place where Bhagavan makes this very clear is in the first subsection of the first section of Vichara Sangraham. Before I read the meaning of this section, I will just say one thing about Vichara Sangraham, which is important to bear in mind. Vichara Sangraham is a work that is the original notes that were taken, but later were later edited into Vichara Sangraham, were taken, those notes were made by Gambhiram Seshya, who came to Bhagavan at about the same time as Shiva Prakasham Pillai. In other words, in the early years of the 20th century, around 1900, 1901, 1902. But whereas Shiva Prakasham Pillai, for whom Bhagavan gave the work Nana, whereas Shiva Prakasham Pillai came to Bhagavan with one clear aim in mind. That is, the first question he asked Bhagavan was, Swami, who am I? So he was a disciple who was perfectly attuned to the that is, even before coming to Bhagavan, he was already perfectly attuned to the teachings for which Bhagavan had come to give the world. So that is, when he came to Bhagavan and asked, who am I? He didn't know at that time, but that was the very purpose for which Arunachala Shiva had himself appeared in human form as Bhagavan Ramana, in order to teach us this path of investigating who am I. So Shiva Prakasham Pillai was a disciple perfectly attuned to Bhagavan. So all the questions he asked Bhagavan were very relevant to the core of what Bhagavan had come to give us, to teach the world. That is why that work Nana is such an important work. In contrast, Vichara Sangraham came into existence because of a devotee called Gambhiram Seshya. Gambhiram Seshya was an older man. He had read many books on Vedanta and yoga and so on, mostly in English. And among the books he had read were various books by Vivekananda. Vivekananda's books on the four yogas, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. He had read these books, and he had read various other books, mostly in English. In those days, in the early years of the 20th century, all these books by Vivekananda were hot off the press, as it were. That is, it was only in the 1890s, in the previous decade, but Vivekananda had written these books. So anyway, Gambhiram Seshya had read these and various other books, but he wasn't able to understand all that he had read in such books. So he came to Bhagavan with these books and asked Bhagavan to explain to him certain passages that he couldn't understand. So Bhagavan then explained. Some of his explanations may have been in orally, but in those days, Bhagavan wasn't explaining much. So some of his explanations may also have been either written in the sand or on a slate, as is the case with many of the answers Bhagavan gave to Shiv Prakashan Pillai. But anyway, Gambhiram Seshya kept a note of whatever Bhagavan replied. So a lot of what Gambhiram Seshya gathered was summaries that Bhagavan had given in Tamil of what was written in the books of Vivekananda and other books on yoga and Vedanta about these subjects. So most of Vichara Sangraham is not the original teachings of Bhagavan. But in addition to paraphrasing some of those, what was written in some of those books, presenting them in a way that Gambhiram Seshya could understand, Bhagavan also added clarifications of his own. So Vichara Sangraham, I would say, just a rough estimate, about 10% of Vichara Sangraham is the pure teachings of Bhagavan, the original teachings of Bhagavan. 90% is a paraphrase or summary by Bhagavan in Tamil of passages that Gambhiram Seshya had difficulty in understanding in English books by Vivekananda and others. And there may also have been some Theosophical Society books and so on, because in those days, the Theosophical Society was also publishing books on yoga and Vedanta and so on. So anyway, Vichara Sangraham is a bit of a mixed bag, but certain portions of Vichara Sangraham are the pure teachings of Bhagavan. And this, that is the portion of Vichara Sangraham that is the purest teaching of Bhagavan, is this first subsection of section 1. So this is a very important passage. I won't read the Tamil, I'll just read the meaning in English and explain it. What Bhagavan says here is, for all sentient beings, one awareness naturally appears as I in all matters, such as I went, I came, I remained, I did, does it not? If one considers why that is, since activities such as going do not exist separately, but only in association with a body, it appears to be saying, does it not, that the body itself, that the body itself is I. Since the body did not exist before being born, since it is composed of the 5 elements, since it does not exist in sleep, and since it will depart as a corpse, is it appropriate to speak of it as the awareness I? It is not appropriate. The awareness that rises as I, referring to the body in this way, being intermediate, alone is what is called variously as tat bodham, ahankaram, avidya, maya, malam, and jiva. This sentence requires a little bit of explanation. When he said the awareness that rises as I, referring to the body, that means the awareness of ourself as I am this body. That is what is implied there. And when he says it is being intermediate, the term he uses for intermediate is abantaramai. Abantaram means, wait a second, sorry, I'm just checking that I've got that word correct. It is, I think it's abantaramai. Okay, I can't find it now. Sorry, I'm a little bit dyslexic. So yes, abantaramai. Abantara means what is intermediate or comes in between. So when Bhagavan says ego is intermediate, what he means is firstly, it appears as a link between real awareness and the body. That is, the pure awareness that we actually are has no connection with the body at all. Though it is the underlying reality of the body and of everything else, it has no connection. That is, in the view of pure awareness, there is no body or world or anything. So the link between that pure awareness, that real awareness that we actually are, and the body, and hence all other things, is only ego. So that's what he means by saying it's intermediate. It is a link because it is distinct, as Bhagavan explains in verse 24 of Ulladu. Ego is neither the body, which is jada, and therefore is not aware of itself as I, nor is it Sat-Chit. Sat-Chit means the pure existence awareness, what we actually are, because Sat-Chit doesn't rise. Sat-Chit always remains as it is. It doesn't undergo any change. But between these two, one thing, I, rises as the extent of the body. So when he says it's between these two, he's indicating it's neither the body nor is it Sat-Chit, but it's something that rises, borrowing the properties of both. It borrows its form from the body. It borrows its substance, its aware existence and awareness from Sat-Chit. So it is neither, but it poses as both. So this is what Bhagavan means by saying it's intermediate, because it appears between the real awareness and the body. It is distinct from both, but it partakes of the nature of each of them. So that Avantarama is a very significant word in this context. So he said this false awareness that rises as I am this body, being intermediate, alone is what is called variously as Tat-Bodham. Tat-Bodham is a term that literally means awareness of that, but that is often used in the sense of egotism, which is awareness of ourselves as a particular thing, distinct from all other things. So Tat-Bodham here it's a word often used in Tamil philosophical literature to refer to ego or egotism. So he says it's called variously Tat-Bodham, Ahankaram. Ahankaram means ego. Avidya, ignorance. Maya, the power of self-deception or delusion, namely the mind. Malam, impurity. And Jiva, soul. So Bhagavan clarifies here that what is called avidya or ignorance and Maya is nothing but ego itself. That is, avidya means ignorance, but we are never actually ignorant of our real nature, because our real nature is the pure awareness I am. We are always aware I am. But when in sleep, we are aware only I am. In waking and dream, when we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as I am, but we're not aware of ourselves as just I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am this person. So that ego is a false awareness of ourselves. It's not that we are actually ignorant of ourselves. We know I am, we know that we are, but we don't know what we are, because a false identity has been superimposed upon our existence. What we actually are is just our existence, I am. But we take ourselves to be something other than that because of this false identity. So what is called ignorance is nothing but ego, this false awareness I am this body. And ego itself is Maya. That is, Maya is said to have two forces. The Avarana Shakti, the veiling power, and the Vikshepa, the dissipating or dispersing power. As for false awareness, I am this body, ego is the power of veiling. because by taking ourselves to be a body, we veil our true nature. Our true nature is just the pure I am, but now we don't experience ourselves as, we experience ourselves as I am, but not just as I am. We experience ourselves as I am this body. That is what is called avarana. So ego is the power of avarana, or veiling. Vikshepa means scattering or dispersing. So as soon as we take ourselves to be a body, our attention goes outwards and we project all this multiplicity. So since all this multiplicity exists only in the view of ourself as ego, all this is the dream of ourself as ego. So it is ego who has projected all this. So ego is both the avarana shakti and the vikshepa shakti. So there's no maya other than ego. So ego is both avidya and maya. That is why it's called malam. Malam means impurity. And it's also what is called jiva. In classical Advaita, there were, after Shankara, among the followers of Shankara, there were several schools of opinion among the followers of Shankara about how to interpret and understand Shankara's works. So since Shankara emphasized very strongly that the root cause of the problem is avidya, and avidya means ignorance of our own real nature, among his followers, two major schools among his philosophers was the Bhamati school and the what's the other school? Bhamati and Avarana, I think it's called. No, not. I've forgotten. Sorry, I've forgotten. But anyway, they were of two different opinions. What if there is ignorance? Then what is it that is ignorant? Is it the jiva that is ignorant? One school said, no, it can't be the jiva that is ignorant because ignorance is the cause and jiva is an effect. So ignorance must precede the jiva. Therefore, ignorance, the locus of ignorance, the asraya of ignorance must be Brahman. And the other school said, no, Brahman cannot be ignorant. So ignorance can only be for jiva. Bhagavan very simply solved this problem by pointing out the simple fact that jiva and avidya are one and the same. Jiva is ego, the false awareness I am this body, which is itself avidya. So though these are very, very simple sentences that Bhagavan is writing here, but actually they're very, very deep in meaning. If we think carefully about what Bhagavan is saying here, it has a very deep meaning and significance. And then Bhagavan goes on to ask, is it proper for us to remain without investigating this? That is, investigating this I. Like this I that has risen, referring to the body. So is it appropriate when clearly we cannot be this body? Is it appropriate for us to remain without investigating it? That's the implication that Bhagavan says here. And then he goes on to say, for investigating, that implies for prompting us and encouraging us to investigate this false awareness that rises as I, mistaking itself to be a body. But that's how we have to understand it. But what he actually says is, for investigating, is it not, all sastras or spiritual texts have come into existence and proclaimed that the annihilation of the Tat Bodham alone is mukti. So how to investigate? If one asks this, how to investigate, the reply is, does this body, which is jada, non-aware, like a block of wood, come shining and behaving as I? It does not come. In other words, it isn't what is aware of itself as I. Therefore, making the corpse body remain as a corpse, and being without uttering I, even by mouth, even by word here can mean by speech, either physically or mentally. So without uttering the word I, either by pronouncing it verbally or by thinking it, in other words, without uttering it even in our mind, if one keenly investigates what is it that now shines as I, then in one's heart, a kind of spuripu alone will appear itself to itself without sound as I am I. This word spuripu, this is a Tamil word, it is derived from the that is the Tamil verb spuri is derived from the Sanskrit word spur. So this spuripu means the same as sporana in Sanskrit. That is, in Sanskrit it's called sporana, which is a noun derived from the verb spur. In Tamil, spuripu is a noun derived from the same verb. So spuripu in this context, spuripu or sporana may have a range of meanings depending on the context, but in the context in which Bhagavan uses these terms, sporana or spuripu, it means a fresh clarity. That is, spur means to shine or become clear. So spuripu or sporana in this context means a fresh clarity. So when he says, then in one's heart, a kind of spuripu or sporana or fresh clarity alone will appear. I think he says, if I remember correctly, tanakutane. Tanakutane means, tanakutane, we can take it either to mean itself to itself or oneself to oneself. That is this, what he indicates by saying tanakutane, though it appears, it doesn't appear as an object. It's a clarity of a fresh clarity of awareness of ourself. That is, we are always aware of ourselves as I am, but this clarity will appear without sound as I am I. I am I means as awareness of ourself as ourself alone. So this is the clarity we get. To the extent to which we look inwards, we begin to recognize, though so long as we're looking outwards, we seem to be this body, we seem to be limited to this body. But when we look within, we see that what we actually are is not this body or mind or anything else. What we actually are is just I and I alone. So what he means by I am I is awareness of ourself as ourself alone. And this awareness is something that awareness is ourself and it shines to ourself. That's what he means by saying tanakutane, itself to itself or oneself to oneself. And then he goes on to say, without leaving it, without leaving, abandoning or letting go of it, that refers to the spuripu, the fresh clarity that shines as I am I. If one just is, summa irandal, if one just remains as being, that implies, just remain as we actually are, the sporana will completely annihilate the jiva bodha, the sense of individuality, in the form of ahankara, ego, which is called, or which is aware of itself as, this body is I. And then, like fire that catches on camphor, it will itself be extinguished. This alone is said by sages and sacred texts to be moksha, liberation. So when he uses this analogy of fire catching on camphor, and he says, just like when fire catches on camphor, it will continue burning until the camphor is completely burned, and then the fire will be extinguished because there's no more fuel to keep it burning. When he uses this analogy, does that mean that implies that the spuripu, the sporana, will subside? But what exactly does he mean by that? He doesn't mean that the clarity of awareness will subside. What he means is the newness or freshness of that clarity. That is, during the stage of practice, when we are looking within and recognizing more and more clearly, but what we actually are is I and I alone, that is a fresh and new clarity for us, because we're used, when looking outwards, to be experiencing ourselves as the body. When we begin to recognize ourselves as ourself alone, that's a fresh clarity. If we hold on to that clarity, remain with that clarity of our own being, that will like camphor that catches a piece of, like a fire that catches a piece of camphor, it will continue burning until the camphor is destroyed. Likewise, this Sparana will continue burning, provided we hold on to it, because he says if we hold on to it and just be, it will completely annihilate the Jiva Bodhi in the form of Ahankara. When ego is destroyed, just like when the camphor is completely burnt, the fire will be extinguished. When ego is completely destroyed, the Sparana will be extinguished. What he means when he says the Sparana will be extinguished is the newness of that will be extinguished. Not that the clarity will be extinguished, but the clarity will cease to appear. What previously appeared as a new and fresh clarity, as Sparana, will be recognized to be sahaja. It's natural. We are always nothing but that clarity of pure awareness. So it will no longer, the newness or freshness of it is what will be extinguished. So when he talks about the subsidence or extinguishment of Sparana, that is what he's referring to. So that is that. I've explained this passage, but I'll go on to talk a little bit more about it as I go on, because this is a very important paragraph. So as he explains here, if we keenly investigate what it is that shines as I, we will experience a spuripu or sparana, which is a fresh clarity of self-awareness as I am I. In other words, a fresh clarity of awareness of ourself as ourself alone. And we should then try to hold on to that spuripu without letting go of it. Because if we do so, it will thoroughly annihilate ego, the false awareness, I am this body. In this context, some people ask whether he's referring to this practice of firmly holding the sparana I am I, when he wrote in the 5th paragraph of Nana, Nan Endru Karati Kondirundalum Kuda ab iditil kondupoi victu vidum. That means even if one continues thinking I, it will take and leave one in that place, namely the heart or core of oneself, which is the source from which we've risen as ego. But this is what some people suggest. However, there are 2 problems with this suggestion. Firstly, what he said in this passage of Vichara Sangraham is Adane Vidadu Summa Irandal, not letting go of that if one just is, in which Adane, that refers to Sparana, the fresh clarity that appears as I am I, when we keenly investigate what it is that shines as I. Vidadu means not leaving, abandoning, or letting go of, and Summa Irandal means if one just is, thereby implying that we should just be without rising as ego to do anything. Therefore, what he implies in this clause is that we should attend to this sparana so keenly and firmly that we do not allow our attention to be diverted away towards anything else, because attending to anything other than ourselves is an action, and hence the very antithesis of just being, summa irpadu. So he did not mean that we should merely think I am I, since thinking itself is an action, but that we should attend keenly to the awareness that always shines as I am I. But that we have formally overlooked, because until we turn our attention back within to face ourselves alone, we were mistakenly aware of ourselves as I am this body. Moreover, in this same passage, a little bit before that, in the same passage of Vichara Sangraham, Bhagavan said, making the corpse body remain as a corpse and being without uttering I, even by word. So since he says not uttering I by word, he, as I explained, he means uttering it either vocally or mentally by word. So he's not talking here just about thinking I am I, but actually holding on to that clarity of awareness that I am I. Secondly, the fact that in this sentence of Nana, a comma is generally printed after the first Nan, indicates that what he meant by Nan, Endru, Karati, Kondilaram, Dalam, Kuda, even if one continues thinking I, what he's talking about is a mental repetition or manasika japa of I, rather than continuously thinking I am I. However, though a comma has been printed after the first Nan in this sentence, since at least as far back as the first edition of Sri Ramana Nutaratu, his collective works in Tamil, which was published in 1931, he did not actually write a comma after this first Nan in what is perhaps his original handwritten manuscript of this essay version of Nana, a facsimile copy of which was printed on pages 43 to 47 of the June 1993 issue of the Mountain Path. So there is a possibility that he intended to leave the clause Nan Endru Karati Korandirundalam Kuda open to be interpreted either as even if one continues thinking I, or even if one continues thinking I am I. That's a possibility. But in either case, what he implied in this sentence is that continuously thinking I or I am I can be a powerful aid to help us to direct our attention back within to face ourselves and to keep it fixed on ourselves, just as continuously thinking of a name of God can help one to keep one's mind fixed on him. That is, since any word generally refers to something, when we think of a word, it brings to our mind whatever it refers to. So, for example, the noun mango brings a particular fruit to our mind, and the verb run brings a particular action to our mind. Likewise, since the pronoun I refers to ourself, the mere thought of this word I brings ourself to our mind. In other words, it brings our attention back to ourself. So the benefit of thinking I or I am I, or I am, or is that it can help us turn our attention back to ourselves and thereby to become familiar with being self-attentive. In other words, it's this clue that Bhagavan gave us in that 5th paragraph of Nana is a very helpful clue, particularly at the early stages of self-investigation, because thinking I reminds us of our being, and then we just have to hold on to our being. However, once we become familiar with being self-attentive, it is no longer necessary for us to continue thinking such words. And sooner or later, in order to go deep in the practice of being self-attentive, we need to stop thinking anything at all. Because though they refer only to ourselves, even such words can become an unnecessary distraction, as he implies in the above passage of Vichara Sangraham by the clause, Vakalam nan endru salamalirandu. being without uttering I, even by word or speech, whether physically or mentally. That is, it means by word or by speech, but we can take it, we have to infer, but it means not only uttering by verbally, but also uttering mentally. Without uttering the word I at all, either mentally or verbally, we need to just be as we actually are. And that clause occurs in this same sentence. Adalal pinnamana pinnate, pinnamana dehate, pinnam polave iriti, Bakalam nanendru solamal irindu, ipodu nanendru nanena bilanguvadu, edu vendru, kumayai vicharital, apodu hridiatil, nanan endru sattamilamal, that sattam means subtum, without sound, tanakutane, Orbida spiripu matrum tondrum. That means, therefore, making the corpse body remain as a corpse and being without uttering I, even by word, if one keenly investigates what it is but now shines as I, then in one's heart a kind of spuripu or sparana alone will appear, itself to itself, or oneself to oneself, without sound as I am I. And also by the first clause in the first sentence of verse 29 of Uludu Napadu, there he says, Nanendru Vayal Nabiladu, Ul al Manatal, Nanendru Engu Undum, Ena Nadu Tale, Jnana Neriam. That means not saying I by mouth, investigating by an inward thinking mind, where one rises as I, alone is the path of jnana. Though in these two cases, he uses the terms vakalam, even by word, which can also mean even by speech or voice or mouth, and vayal, which means by word or, by mouth or by word or speech or voice, both of which mean by mouth or speech. They also mean by word. So they imply not only uttered by speech, but also uttered by mind. Because in order to sink deep within ourselves, we need to keenly focus our entire attention on ourself alone and not allow our attention to be distracted, even to the slightest extent, by anything else whatsoever, not even by the word I or the affirmation I am I, whether uttered by speech or by mind. When we recognize that the clear awareness, I am I, is not anything new, but what is eternal and therefore natural, sahaja, that is what he describes as the subsidence, cessation, or extinguishing of sparana. To the extent to which we keenly attend to what shines within us as I, we will thereby experience the fresh clarity of self-awareness, clear awareness of ourself as ourself alone, but Bhagavan describes as the sporana or spuripu, but as appears or shines forth as I am I. So our aim should be to attend to ourselves more and more keenly and persistently, and thereby not let go of this sporana. This is the practice of holding the sporana I am I firmly in our heart by calmly and incessantly facing inwards. This practice of holding the sporana I am I firmly in our heart by calmly and incessantly facing inwards is what he describes metaphorically in the first two lines of verse 3 of Appalapattu as pounding the ingredients of an appalam. The principal ingredient of this metaphysical appalam being ego, the dehabhimana, or false identification, I am this body, with a pestle in a stone mortar. what he says these first two lines of verse 3 of Apalapatu is Kal Nengel. What he means by Kal Nengel, that means in the stone heart, but that means in the stone of the heart. That is, he's using the heart as a metaphor for the stone in which the ingredients are pounded. Kal Nengel, Nanan Endru, Kalangamal, Ulmuka, Ulankayal, Oyadu Iditu. What that means is, by the pestle of facing inwards without being agitated, incessantly pounding as I am I in the heartstone. What he implies by this is, by means of the pestle of Unmukha or Ulmukha, that means the practice of facing inwards, without being agitated or confused, by allowing one's attention to be distracted away from oneself under the sway of one's Vishaya vasanas, incessantly pounding ego, the Dehabhimana or false identification, I am this body, by recognizing oneself as I am I, the fresh degree of clarity, swarana, of self-awareness that shines in one's heart as I am I, that is, as awareness of oneself as oneself alone, to the extent that one keenly, calmly, and steadily faces inwards to see who am I. In the heartstone, the heartstone means the pure heart or mind that is imbued with steadfast titiksha, endurance, forbearance, and patience, which is unshakably firm like a stone mortar. So that's what he implies there. The practice of facing inwards in order to see ourself as ourself alone, I am I, which he compares here to pounding the ingredients of an appalam with a pestle in a stone mortar, is what he compares in the above paragraph of the above passage of Vichara Sangraham to allowing a piece of camphor to be burnt and consumed by fire. If fire catches hold of a piece of camphor and is left undisturbed, it will continue burning until it has consumed the camphor completely, whereupon it will itself subside and be extinguished. Likewise, when the fire of Spurana is ignited in our heart, by our keenly investigating what it is that shines as I, if we hold on to it without allowing our attention to be distracted away towards anything else, it will continue burning until it has consumed ego entirely, along with all its Vishaya vasanas. Vishaya vasanas means inclinations to attend to anything other than ourselves, whereupon it will itself subside and be extinguished. In this passage of Vichara Sangraham, after saying Tanum Shantamai Vidam, the Spurana will itself be pacified or subside or be extinguished. He begins the next sentence saying, Iduvei moksham, this alone is moksha. And likewise, in the 6th section of Vichara Sangraham, he says, Ividas puripu adangina sukshmamana idame churiyatitam. That means only the subtle place or subtle state in which this kind of spuripu subsides or ceases is churiyatitam. Churiyatitam means the same as churiya. It's the transcendent state called the fourth, which is our natural state or sahaja sthiti. What exactly does he mean when he says that the spuripu will cease, subside, or be pacified or extinguished? In what sense will it cease or be extinguished? As I explained earlier, what he means by the term spurana or spuripu is the fresh clarity of self-awareness that shines forth as I am I. That is, as awareness of ourself as ourself alone, when we turn our intention back within towards ourself. the more keenly we attend to ourselves, the more clearly the Sphurana will shine. And when we attend to ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything other than ourselves, ego will instantly be swallowed by the perfect clarity of pure awareness, after which that clarity I am I alone will remain shining eternally and without limit as ourself. Therefore, when he says that the Sphurana will subside, cease, or be extinguished, he does not mean that the clarity will subside or cease, but only that its newness and freshness will subside and cease. In other words, the clarity of what we actually are, namely I am I, will cease to seem new or something that was not previously clear, because it will be clear that it is sahaja, our own real nature, and therefore our eternal and ever undiminished awareness of ourself as ourself. That is, when we know ourselves as we actually are, we will see that the only thing that has ever existed is I. So we cannot ever have been anything other than that. In other words, I am only I, and I have never been and never could be anything other than I. Therefore, though I am I seems at first to be a Sphurana, a new and fresh clarity of self-awareness, it is actually not a new awareness, but our eternal awareness of ourself as we always actually are. When we recognize this, namely that the clear awareness I am I is not anything new, but what is eternal and therefore natural, sahaja, that is what he describes as the subsidence, cessation, pacification, or extinguishing of Sphurana. Therefore, the closest we can come to expressing the ultimate truth about ourselves accurately in words is not to say aham brahmasmi, but only to say aham aham, or nan nan, I am I. However, what is important is not the words themselves, but the truth that is conveyed by such words, namely that we are nothing other than ourself, which is Satchit, the fundamental awareness chit of our own existence, Sat, which is what always shines within us as I am. So Bhagavan also expressed this truth using other words that conveyed the same meaning, such as tane tan, oneself alone is oneself. For example, in the last line of the fourth and last verse of Apalapatu, he implies that the purpose of making the metaphorical Tanmaya Apalam, the Apalam composed of that, namely Brahman, is to eat it. And to eat it means Tane Tan Aha Bujika. That means to enjoy or experience as oneself alone is oneself. Likewise, in verse 43 of Sri Arunachala Aksharamlai, he says, Tane Tan, oneself alone is oneself, alone is Tattvam, the reality. What he says in this verse is, Tane Tane Tattvam, Idane Tane Kartuvai Arunachala. That means, Arunachala, oneself alone is the reality. Show this yourself. So this can be, this Tane Tane here, we can interpret two ways. Tan means oneself. Tane is an intensified form of oneself, so it means oneself alone. So when he says Tane Tane, we can either take it to be a repetition for emphasis. Oneself alone is the reality. That's one way of interpreting it. Reality here means tattva. The tattva is just tane tane, oneself alone. Tane kartvai arunachala, show this yourself. There tane refers, he's telling, that's to emphasize the Arunachala, you yourself show this to me yourself. May you yourself show this to me. But we can also take tane to mean, rather than taking it to be a repetition for emphasis, we can also take it to mean tane tan, oneself alone is oneself. In other words, I alone am I. That alone is what is real. And may you yourself show this to me. Tan means oneself, or depending on the context, myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself. And the suffix a is an intensifier that implies alone, indeed, or itself. So tane means oneself alone. Therefore, the first sentence of this verse, tane tattvam, can be interpreted in two ways. It can mean either oneself alone is the reality, in which tane is taken to be a repetition for emphasis, or we can take it to mean oneself alone is oneself, alone is the reality, in which tane, oneself alone is oneself, is taken to be a separate clause that serves as the subject of the sentence. These two interpretations are equally valid and complement each other, because whereas the first just emphasizes that we alone are the sole reality, the second further emphasizes that what we actually are is nothing other than ourself. I alone am I, and implies that awareness of ourself as ourself alone is the reality, because nothing other than ourself actually exists. Clear self-awareness. Sorry. Clear self-awareness, Atmajnana, which shines forth spontaneously as I am I when all thoughts cease, is Satchidananda, the silence of pure being, the one space of pure awareness, and the abode of infinite happiness. In this second verse of Anmavidde, after concluding the first sentence by saying that if we go within investigating ourself, thought will cease, and in the cave of our heart, Atmajnana, awareness of ourself as ourself alone, awareness of ourself as we actually are, alone will shine spontaneously as I am I. In the second sentence, Bhagavan says, Iduve monam, ekavaname, imbataname, which means this alone is silence, the one space, the abode of bliss. That is Atmajnana, which is awareness of ourself as we actually are, namely as I am I, is our real nature. So it alone will remain when we investigate ourselves so keenly that ego is eradicated, and along with it, all other thoughts cease forever. Therefore, since nothing other than Atmajnana, the pure awareness I am I, will then exist, it is infinite and eternal silence, the silence of pure being. It is also the one space, ekavanam, because it is one only without a second, ekam eva advityam, and therefore the infinite and empty space of pure awareness. Not only is it moname, but the silence of pure being, and ekavaname, the one space of pure awareness. The silence of pure being implies sat. The one space of pure awareness implies chit, but also the place of pure happiness, ananda. So he concludes this verse by saying it is imbataname, the place or abode of bliss. Tanam, tanam here means is a Sanskrit form of the Sanskrit word sthanam. So imbataname means the anandasthana, the place of happiness, the abode of happiness. In other words, our real nature, Atmaswarupa, which is what shines eternally as I am I, is pure being, awareness, happiness, Satchidananda, which is beginningless, anadi, infinite, ananta, and undivided Akhanda, as he says in verse 28 of Upadesha Undiyar. What he says in verse 28 of Upadesha Undiyar is Tanadu il yadu ena tan terihil pin anadi ananta sat Akhanda chidanandam. What that means is, if one knows what the nature of oneself is, then beginningless, endless, and unbroken existence, awareness, happiness. What that implies is, if we know what the real nature of ourself is, that in other words, if we know ourselves as I am I, then what will remain existing and shining is only anadi, beginningless, ananta, endless, limitless, or infinite, and akhanda, unbroken, undivided, or unfragmented, satchidananda, existence, awareness, happiness. In order for us to experience ourselves as beginningless, infinite, and undivided satchidananda, we just need to know what our real nature actually is. And to know this, all that is required is for us to go deep within ourselves by keenly investigating our fundamental awareness, I am, which is the source from which we have risen and spread out as ego, the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. Therefore, since nothing can be easier than just being attentively aware of what alone always exists and shines clearly, namely I am, Aye ati sulapum, Anma Vidya Aye ati sulapum, are extremely easy, Atma Vidya are extremely easy. Since he emphasizes in the first two verses of this song, Anma Vidya, but in order for us to know ourselves as we actually are, and thereby to experience the infinite happiness that is our own real nature, all thoughts must cease in such a way that they never rise again. And since all thoughts are about things other than ourselves, in the next verse, he points out firstly that there's no real value in knowing anything other than ourselves, particularly when we do not even know what we ourselves actually are. And secondly, that when we do know ourselves as we actually are, nothing else will exist for us to know. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. So this is the end of my explanation of verse 2 of Anma Vidya. Are there any, have any questions been asked?
Namo Ramana, sir. Sir, there are a couple of questions that Mr. Sushil Motwani has put on the YouTube channel.
Yes.
Given your cough a few minutes ago, would you like to take rest today and address this in the next session, or would you like to...
I think we've got a little bit more time, haven't we? We've got another 5 minutes or so. So shall I try and...
Sure. Time is not a constraint. It was just your cough that I thought you might like to take rest.
That's very considerate of you, but that's okay. I can manage, I think.
Very well, sir.
I'm sorry about this cough.
No worries, sir. I shall read out the question from Mr. Sushil Motwani. Quote, right. Namo Ramana, Michael, sir. While it is ideal to attend to ourselves as and when possible, until the time we reach that stage of attending to the self all the time, is there a minimum time frame that one be attending to the self, which is like a bare minimum, like some other paths talk about Dasham Ansham, 1/10, that is 2.5 hours of sadhana. Also, the mind sometimes revolts and doesn't allow self-attention. What are the other things that Bhagavan may have suggested that one can do to subside the thoughts? Unquote.
Okay, that's a good question. Bhagavan, that is, whenever Bhagavan gave any indication of how much time we should spend attending to ourselves, he always indicated always. For example, in the 16th paragraph of Nana, he defines what he means by the term Atma Vichara. He says, Sadakalamum manate atmavil vetirupatakutan atmavicharam endrupaya. That means the name Atmavichara refers only to always keeping the mind on oneself. So there he emphasizes always, sadakalam. Sadakalam is a strong way. In Tamil, an extra prefix is added at the end, sadakalamum. That's a very, very strong way of saying always. He also, in another sentence, in the 11th paragraph of Nana, he says, Oruvan tan sarupam adeyam varayal, nirantara swarupa smarane kai patruvanayan adu andre podum. Until one attains swarupa, one's own real nature, if one firmly holds on to nirantara swarupa smarana. Nirantara means unceasing, incessant, unbroken. Swarupa smarana means self-remembrance. Adu andre podum, that alone is sufficient. So he clearly indicates that what we should be aiming towards is to be constantly self-attentive. However, in practice, if we're honest with ourselves, I don't think any of us can claim to ourselves, but we are constantly attending to ourselves, because in order to attend to ourselves constantly requires all-consuming love. We must have more love for knowing and being what we actually are than we have for anything else whatsoever. So until we attain such all-consuming love, we will, at least for some of the time, come under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas and allow our mind to go outwards. So what is the minimum that we should attend to ourselves? I think a good guideline is our aim should be not to be concerned about duration. If we are thinking about, I must hold on to self-attentiveness for the next 20 minutes or something, we are thinking about time, which is something other than ourselves. So we shouldn't be thinking in terms of time. We should only think of the present moment. I am aware of myself now, so let me hold on to this self-awareness, this awareness I am here and now. If we take care of each and every moment, then our self-attentiveness will be continuous. So let's not worry about time. Let's try to the extent possible from each moment to try and attend to ourselves. Of course, we won't succeed. Our attention will keep on being distracted by other things. We're under the sway of our vasanas, we'll keep on going outwards. But we need to bring it back and try moment by moment to be self-attentive. That's the only practical thing. We cannot measure how long we are self-attentive, because at the actual moment we are really self-attentive, there's no time. So and the nature of the mind, because as Bhagavan explains in verse 25 of Aludunapadu, what is the nature of this ego? This ego is a formless phantom or demon. And its very nature is Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikam, grasping form, it stands or it endures. Urupatri undu mika ongam, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to be constantly grasping form. But then he adds, very important sentence, Tedinal otum pidicum. If we, Tedinal literally means if seeking. If seeking, it takes flight. So what is to seek what? That means if we as ego seek our own reality, seek to know who am I actually, what actually am I, in other words, we turn our attention back within to investigate ourselves, this ego will, autum pidicum means it will take to running away. It'll take flight. It'll run away. It's because we seem to be ego only so long as we're looking outwards. When we're looking elsewhere, we seem to be ego. But if we look back within to try and find this ego, there's no such thing as ego to be found. That's why sometimes when people used to ask Bhagavan, why did this ego come into existence? How did this ego come into existence? Bhagavan would say, first you go and find that ego, and then bring the ego to me and we can find out, we can consider how it came into existence. Because if we look for this ego, we will never find it, because there's no such thing. We seem to be ego only when we're not looking at ourselves, when we're not attending to ourselves. When we attend to ourselves, there's no ego to be found. So the ego depends for its very existence on grasping form. That means holding on to things. It itself is formless. So all forms, all phenomena, whether physical phenomena, mental phenomena of any kind whatsoever, they are all things other than ourselves. That is, as ego, we have a subject. All the forms are objects. So ego cannot stand for a moment without grasping form. So it's the very nature of ourself as ego to grasp form. This is why we have very strong Vishaya Vasanas. The Vishaya Vasanas, Vishaya means objects or phenomena. So what Bhagavan refers to in that verse as Uru, form, is what he refers to as Vishaya when he talks about Vishaya Vasanas. So Vishaya Vasanas means our inclination to hold on to Vishayas, objects or phenomena. This is the very nature of ego. So inevitably, we will be swayed by our Vishaya Vasanas again and again. But if we persevere in this practice, trying to hold on to self-attentiveness more and more and more, we will thereby weaken those Vishaya Vasanas and strengthen the Sat Vasana. Sat Vasana is the opposite of Vishaya Vasanas. Sat means being, existence, our own being. So Sat is what is shining in us as I am. So our inclination or love to hold on to our own being and thereby to be as we actually are, that is called Sat Vasana. So the more we practice this self-attentiveness, the more the Sat Vasana will be strengthened and the Vishaya Vasanas will be weakened. So gradually, we will develop more and more love to attend only to ourselves. So the best, if we want to gain the love to attend to ourselves, the most effective way to do so is to try more and more and more to attend to ourselves. Of course, we all fail in this time and time again, but the only solution to our failure is to keep on trying. And we shouldn't be disheartened by our failure. It is sometimes said, the road to success is paved in failure. If you've never failed, that means you've never tried. So we shouldn't be disheartened by our failure. The fact we are failing means that at least we're trying. If we weren't trying, we wouldn't be failing. So the important thing is to keep on trying more and more and more. Doesn't matter however many times we fail, so long as we are faithful in our attempt to continue trying to hold on to self-attentiveness, we will surely succeed. Because ultimately, this battle going on in our own will between our Sat Vasana, which is now currently very, very weak, and our Vishaya Vasanas, which seem to be so strong, this battle is ultimately being fought by grace. It is Bhagavan's grace alone that has planted the seed of Sat Vasana in our heart. So Bhagavan is such a gardener. If he plants a seed, he will nurture that seed until it grows into a big plant. So Bhagavan, we may be constantly failing in our efforts. Bhagavan is relentless. His grace is relentless. So his grace will surely win. This is what he refers to in Aksharamlai as Aral Poratam. Hokum Varavumil Poduveli inil Aral Poratankat Arunachala. That means, Arunachala, show me this warfare of grace, but is fought in the common space, the open space of pure awareness, in which there's no coming and going. So we all have to go through this battle. So Bhagavan prays to Arunachala, show me this battle. Don't let this battle come to an end. Show me this battle to it. The implication is show me this battle to its very conclusion. So in other words, keep on giving me the love to try more and more and more to be self-attentive. His grace is always doing that. So if we, by trying to be self-attentive, we are yielding ourselves to his grace. We are surrendering to his grace. And the more we surrender to his grace, the more we will be taken over by grace. Now we are under the sway of our Vishaya Vasanas. Our aim is to come under the sway of his grace. This is what Bhagavan refers to. There's a verb in Tamil, alvadu. That means coming under the control of, coming under the charge of. But it's a very beautiful word because it conveys not only the meaning of controlling, but also caring for. So Bhagavan takes possession of us. Bhagavan brings us, takes control of us, takes charge of us. That's the best way of putting it. Takes charge. Like if a child is orphaned, a loving relative will take charge of it. What you mean when you say someone takes charge of a child, they take responsibility for that child. They take responsibility for caring for that child, for loving for that child, for raising that child, keeping that child, showing that child a good path in life and everything. That is what is meant by taking charge. So Bhagavan, in so many verses of Aksharamala, he's praying to Arunachala to take charge. For example, in one verse, he says, Auve polenakun arole tandane alu vadunganar Arunachala. Like a mother, it is your duty to bestow your grace on me and it's your duty as a mother, bestowing your grace on me, to taking charge of me, bestowing your grace upon me. So that is the duty of Arunachala. That is the duty of Bhagavan. To take charge of us. But we must willingly allow him to take charge of us. If we keep on going outwards, we are surrendering ourselves to our vasanas rather than surrendering ourselves to his grace. So it's for us to surrender ourselves to his grace, but it's for his grace to give us the love to surrender to his grace. So ultimately, as Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It is grace that starts us on this path. It is grace that sows this seed of Satvasana in our heart. It is grace that draws us to Bhagavan's path, makes us interested in following his path. It is grace that guides us along this path. And finally, it is grace that will swallow us. That's what Bhagavan means by saying grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. So ultimately, it's all the work of grace. But we have the responsibility to yield ourselves to grace. And we can yield ourselves to grace most effectively by turning our attention within. Because his grace is always pulling our attention within. When we are going outward, we are resisting that inward pull. When we turn back within, we are submitting ourselves, surrendering ourselves to that inward pull. So the grace will play its part. But the more we cooperate with grace, the quicker the whole process will be finished. Regarding other things that we can do to support us on this path, in my experience, the greatest support on this path is Bhagavan's own words. Bhagavan, fortunately for us, Bhagavan has written the core principles of his teachings in his own works such as Anmavidya, Upadesha Undiyya, Ulladu Napadu, Apalapatu, Ekama Panchakam, Nana, many of the verses of Ulladu Napadu and Bandham, and most importantly in Arunachala Stuti Panchakam, particularly in Aksharamala, because Aksharamala is representing the actual all that he teaches us in Upadesha Undiyya, Ulladu Napadu, and Anmavidya. how it is when we actually try to apply this in practice, that is what he teaches us in Aksharamla. What is the nitty-gritty of the actual practice? That is, when we actually try to apply all that Bhagavan has taught us, when we try to apply it in practice, we come up against one big obstacle in the form of our own Vishaya vasanas, our own liking to go outwards. So how to deal with these Vishaya vasanas? That is what Bhagavan is teaching us in a very subtle and deep way in Aksharamla. And also in the other hymns of Arunachal Stuti Panchakam. So all of Bhagavan's works are a tremendous aid to us in this path. So keeping our mind dwelling upon his works, that is, reading his works, is called Sravana. Thinking deeply about his works, that is making sense of them, understanding what he's trying to teach us through his words, that is called Manana. And most important of all is Nididhyasana, actually putting it into practice. Nididhyasana means deep contemplation. That means contemplation, that is Swarupa Dhyana, contemplation on our own real nature. So the greatest aid to Nididhyasana is Sravana and Manana. By reading Bhagavan's works and thinking about his teachings constantly, that is the best external satsanga we can have. But the best satsanga of all, as Bhagavan said, sat means being. So Atma Sangha is the best satsanga. That means turning our attention within and being as we are, that is the best satsanga. But when our mind comes outwards, the second best satsanga is to keep our mind soaking in Bhagavan's teachings, reading them, thinking about them, contemplating them, because his teachings are constantly urging us to turn back within. So the greatest support and encouragement in following this path we will get by whenever our mind comes outward, we should keep it dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings in order to encourage us to go back within. That is the very purpose of Sravana and Manana, is to encourage us in our Nididhyasana. So Sravana and Manana are useful to the extent to which they encourage us to put it into practice. So this is the greatest aid. No other practices or nothing else is needed. So long as we are faithful to Bhagavan's teachings, keep our mind dwelling on his teaching. Though we may have read these works 100,000, 10,000 times, doesn't matter. The more we keep our mind dwelling on these, and the more we allow these Bhagavan's words to encourage us to turn within, the more clarity we will get, and the more deeply we will understand the significance and implication of the words here, his own words in these works. So basically, I mean, in Vedanta, in Advaita, this is the tradition, but Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, this is the path to moksha. So if we express it in terms of Bhagavan's teaching, the Nididhyasana is this practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. But Sravana, Manana, but support this practice as dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings. I hope that is an adequate answer to that question. You said there's one more question.
These two were the only questions we had on the YouTube channel, sir. Once again, on behalf of all the devotees and Raman Kendra Delhi, sir, a very warm thank you for your guidance, and as always,
all thanks to Bhagavan, because I'm just pointing out what Bhagavan has taught us, and it is only by his grace that I have the love to do so. So everything is his grace. His grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. So all thanks only to Bhagavan. Om Namo
100%, sir, it is absolutely his grace. 100%, sir, it is absolutely his grace. Thank you so much once again, and we shall meet you next month, second Sunday of the month, same time, sir.
And I'm sorry I ran a little bit over time today. I hope
No
that
worries,
wasn't
sir.
a problem.
No worries, no worries.
Right.
Thank you. And now I shall request Narayananji at the Delhi Shrine to conclude today's program with Aarati. Narayananji?
Yes, sir. கேட்ட அக்ஷரமண மாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரம் அருளி காப்பாயே அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலம் என்ற அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை பேரறுப்பார் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீயும் முற்று தினமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அகங்குகுந்தீர்ப்பும் அககுகை கிரையாய் அமர்வித்ததென்கொள் அருணாச்சலா ஆறு காயனை ஆண்டனை அகிலம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா இப்பழித்த புனை ஏனினை பித்தாய் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னை பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா புனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று உளம்பிடாது உன்னை கண்டு அட உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்திப்போ என்னை கலமாவிடு இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கல்வன் அகத்தினில் புகும்போது அகத்தில் நீ இல்லையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவன உன்னை ஒளி தேவர் வருவார் உன் சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா ஓங்காரம் பொருள் உப்புயர்வில்லை உனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா ஔவை போல எனக்கும் அருளை தந்து ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமண மாலை வாழி. ஓம் பூர்புவஸ்வ தத்சர்வவாணியம் भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवसौद प्रसवसत्यं दोर्जन प्रचनामि अमृतोऽमृतं स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपानाय स्वाहा ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा ओम उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नटराजने नमः कार्तिकाय मुरुगावली सुब्रमण्य स्वामीनाथन दक्षिणामूर्ति नटराज भैरव नंदीमहेश्वराय शिव पार्वती नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः पुनः अन्नदानं गोशीरं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपचारसूत्राकुशं समर्पयामि धीराजनं समर्पयामि धीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि पूगीबल समाहितं नागवली तलुकं कर्पूर्ण सूर्णं नीराजलं क्षीरमृतमर्पिते समर्पयामि ओम नमो भगवते श्री रमणाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री रमणाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री रमणाय नमः सोमो वा एकस्य राजमादत्ते यो राजातं राजो वा सोमेरे जते देवस्वामेवानि यविन्ति भवन्ति एतावन्तो वै देवानां स्वा सैतवास्मस्पैचन्ति सैनं वस्तवन्ते राजाय देवराजा भवति तत्र सूर्योपासत्यन्तकालं देवावस्तुतवान् तमेवान्यं सत्यवता सर्वं दिवानि कर्पूरनीराजनं श्रीरमणमयशिष्टं कार्तिकायं सुब्रह्मण्याय स्वामिनारायण दक्षिणामूर्तये नटराजा भैरव नन्दिमहेश्वरासनं समर्पयामि बाहर का लाइट जला थोड़ा पुष्पम ले लीजिए डॉक्टर साहब यो भाव पुष्पम वेदा पुष्पवान प्रजावान पशुमान बोधि चंद्रमा वाभां पुष्पम पुष्पम पुष्पवान प्रजावान पशुमान बोधि ओम तत् ब्रह्मा ओम तत् वायु ओम तत् आत्मा ओम तत् सत्यम ओम तत् सर्वम ओम तत् पुरो नमः अंधत्तर्दि भूते च गुहाया पुष्पमुच्चसु त्वं यज्ञत्तं वसत्कार त्वं इन्द्रत्तं रुद्रत्तं विष्णुत्तं ब्रह्मत्वं प्रजापति ओम तदाभो ज्योतिर्समृतं परमेश्वरः योग देवादोषण प्रकृतो वेदांत सत्य प्रतिष्ठित तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमहेश्वर मंत्र पुष्पम श्री रमणमयशिष्टं नटराजा कार्तिकेय मुरुगा वडीदेव सुब्रह्मण्य स्वामिनाथे दक्षिणामूर्ति नटराजा भैरव नंदीश्वर शिवपार्वतीं समर्पयामि ओम तत् ब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम यानि यानि च पापानि जन्मान्तरकृतानि च तानि तानि नश्यन्ति प्रवचन पदे पदे
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's satsang with Mr. Michael James. We shall reconvene and meet Mr. James on the second Sunday of next month. Namo Ramana.